So this is a 9-month-old who had bilateral corneal transplants, and at this stage there's also a significant lenticular opacity right in the central. So this is now doing a lensectomy. So I'd like to do a lensectomy with a AC maintainer. So trying to place an AC maintainer in a post-graft eye, slightly challenging because the iris can be slightly adherent to the endothelium. So making sure that you place your AC maintainer in the area of the anterior chamber, which is the deepest. I'm just making an incision here with an MVR 1.1 millimeter, and the initial incision had a slight iris tissue, so I just slightly retracted back and then made the full pass. We're using a constellation device, and the infusion is set at 25 millimeters of mercury. The infusion over here is a 19 gauge infusion, which is attached to the constellation vitrector settings. So, and just turn the infusion on. The infusion is controlled by a foot pedal, and another main incision at 12 o'clock, again with the MVR 1.1 millimeter. It's important to keep the AC maintained, and there's a small sine key over here, so, which you can either break manually or you can break it with the use of a viscoelastic device. So the pupil is not dilating here even after the use of intracameral phenylephrine. In the pediatric cases, even in the pediatric cases, I use phenylephrine neat without diluting it. So decided to put iris hooks over here. I took a 23 gauge needle and making the entry ports. Again, making sure that be very gentle with your insertion of the needle and counter traction from the other side. Iris hooks going in without any difficulty, and care not to stretch the iris too much, as that can cause damage to the fingers. Again, counter traction, slightly moving the needle sideways, side by side, and gives you a good entry into the anterior chamber. So there we are, so pupil dilated. You can see the central opacity about 3.5 to 4 millimeter in size. So for the capsulotomy, I use a straight needle, 23 gauge straight needle. At this point, you can, with your foot switch, you can turn the infusion off, and I use viscoat over here. Gives good depth to the chamber. Straight needle, 23 gauge needle. It's quite sharp tip, so you can puncture the capsule quite easily. As soon as I puncture the capsule, I make a sideways movement, and there we are. We have a nice edge of the anterior capsule. You can use microcapsular access forceps. Over here we have MST micro forceps. I like them because they're quite the insertion is quite smooth, and they also have a mark uh, on them, so you can gauge your capsular axis. In this case, because the eye is only 8.5 to 9 millimeter, and with anterior segment abnormality, decided not to implant an intraocular lens. So while you're pulling on the rex, it's important to look at the direction of the tearing of your anterior capsule. So there's no need to do any hydrodissection here, because there could be an opacity in the posterior capsule, but since the infusion is there, and once you start you start aspirating, the hydrodissection just happens on its own. Since there's viscoat inside there, it takes a while for the cutter to aspirate, so we increase the vacuum to 600, and also turn the cutter on. The cutter on and off can be controlled by your foot pedal. So you can see the cutter is on, and aspiration is there, and the cut rate is overhead is 5000, and the vacuum is 600. So here we are aspirating the lens material. You can see the lens nicely coming into the anterior cutter. We start the lensectomy from the periphery, and then move it towards the central. And using these circular motions, trying to free the lens matter from the capsule, while maintaining the suction through the cutter. At times, if you see that you have a big chunk, you can turn your cutter on again with your foot switch. There was a slight capsular plaque, a cutter was on, and it easily chewed by the cutter. Now just working our way around the whole of the lens, trying to get as much as possible from the periphery first, leaving the central lens material for the end. Pretty much like doing your irrigation and aspiration through a coaxial IA device. Most of us have switched to bimanuals. If you have experience with your coaxial IA, this pretty much feels like the same. So once at 12 o'clock, I try to engage the lens material at 12 o'clock and try to pull it down, so at least you get the whole piece in one go. Again, at this point you turn your cutter off and engage and pull towards 6 o'clock. Most of the time you would get most of the lens material out. Here we are now, lens material is all gone. Again, you cut it off and polish the edges of your interior capsule. So at this point now it's time to do the posterior capsulotomy. So turn the vitreous cutter towards the vitreous with the suction, with the vacuum on, and with the cutting on you can make a tiny circular hole in the posterior capsule. Initially I avoid to enlarge the capsule. I do a limited anterior vitrectomy, remove the hyaloid face as much as possible, and then in a circular manner start to increase the size of the posterior capsule along with doing meticulous anterior vitrectomy and somewhat core vitrectomy as far as long and or as far as possible where I see it's safe. I think removing the vitreous as much as possible is quite important, as it can again come to the anterior chamber and get stuck to one of the wounds. It can cause later problems. So just a continuation of the anterior vitrectomy. It's very important to keep your cutter on at this stage, especially when you're in the vitreous cavity. You want to avoid any vitreous traction. These eyes are already abnormal, and try to be as careful as possible. Seeing a red reflex and glimpses of the optic nerve reassuring. The posterior segment is fine. So first we'll take out the iris hooks. So hold them from one end, loosen the plastic lock, and they come out quite easily. engage from the hook itself, turn it and slide it out. The incisions will be closed by 10 Vicryl, and I usually place an air bubble at the end that checks the integrity of the wound and also makes sure that we don't have any vitreous in the anterior chamber. Since the conjunctiva was the incisions were slightly conjunctival, there has been some ballooning of the conjunctiva. So you can, with your venas, you can dissect the cones and make sure you can see your wound clearly, so they can be stitched properly. So we've just putting the last suture, the congenital peritomy that we did. We're just closing it to have a double seal. There's an air bubble inside, the air bubble is round, showing no vitreous. And we finish the case by giving a subcons and intracam, laprocam. Thank you very much for watching the video.